My father looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You failed, Rebecca. You're a complete disappointment who couldn't even make it through basic training." I sat there watching him pin my sister's new Air Marshal badge to the family achievement board, surrounded by commendations that would never include my name. What he didn't know was that in 48 hours, my sister's commanding officer would look directly at me and say the words that would shatter everything. "Ma'am, you're the Transportation Security Director?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd heard variations of them for the past 8 years. Chief Master Sergeant Robert Torres, my father, had perfected the art of disappointment, and tonight he was delivering his masterpiece. The living room of our Phoenix home felt smaller than usual, compressed by the weight of his judgment and the gleaming display of military achievements that covered every available wall space. "Look at your sister," he continued, his voice carrying the same authority he'd used commanding Air Force security forces for 26 years. He gestured toward Carmen, who sat uncomfortably in her crisp Federal Air Marshal uniform, the new badge still catching the overhead light. 28 years old and already protecting commercial aviation at the federal level. "And you?" His eyes swept over me with barely concealed disgust. 31 and working security at a shopping mall. I stared down at my hands, folded carefully in my lap to hide their trembling. The family dinner to celebrate Carmen's promotion to Senior Air Marshal had turned into another referendum on my failures. Another opportunity for my father to catalog my shortcomings in front of anyone willing to listen. Around us, the walls told the story of the Torres family's dedication to security and service. My father's commendations from his Air Force career, my grandfather's police medals from his time with Phoenix PD, my uncle's Border Patrol citations. 3 generations of law enforcement and military service, all leading to Carmen's latest achievement. And then there was the empty space. The section of wall where my accomplishments should have been, conspicuously bare except for a single photo from my brief time in basic training. A photo my father kept as a reminder of what he called my greatest failure. My stepmother, Linda, tried to intervene. "Robert, maybe we should focus on celebrating Carmen tonight." "This is part of celebrating Carmen," he interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "She understands what duty means. She understands that when you start something, you finish it. She didn't wash out of basic training after 6 weeks with some mysterious medical discharge that she's never properly explained." Carmen shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, Rebecca's situation was complicated. Maybe there's more too." "There's nothing more to know," my father cut her off. "She quit, plain and simple. Couldn't handle the pressure, couldn't meet the standards, and has been running from responsibility ever since." He turned back to me, his weathered face etched with years of disappointment. "Mall security, Rebecca, that's what 8 years of quote, figuring yourself out has led to. Walking around a shopping center with a flashlight and a radio." The shame in his voice was unmistakable. I was the family secret. The failure they acknowledged but didn't celebrate. The daughter who'd somehow lost her way and never found it back. At family gatherings with his old Air Force buddies, he'd mention Carmen's achievements at length, then dismiss my existence with a wave of his hand and a change of subject. "I used to tell people I had 2 daughters serving their country," he continued, his voice dropping to that quiet tone that was somehow worse than shouting. "Now I tell them I have 1 daughter protecting American aviation and another daughter who protects Orange Julius from shoplifters." Carmen finally found her voice. "Dad, that's not fair. Rebecca works hard." "At a job any high school dropout could do." He stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the desert landscape. "She had every opportunity. Full support through basic training, family connections that could have opened doors. And she threw it all away the first time things got difficult." I pushed back from the dinner table, my chair scraping against the tile floor. "I should go." "Yes," my father said without turning around. "You probably should." As I gathered my jacket, I caught Carmen's apologetic glance, but I couldn't meet her eyes. She was everything our father had hoped for: federal law enforcement, protecting American aviation, following in the family tradition with honor. I was exactly what my father believed, a quitter who'd walked away from service and settled for mediocrity. If only he knew the truth about my medical discharge. If only he knew what I'd actually been doing for the past 8 years while he assumed I was lost. But some secrets were classified beyond his clearance level. What my father didn't know, what none of them could know, was that I hadn't washed out of basic training in failure. I'd been pulled out by people who didn't officially exist. 6 weeks into my Air Force basic training at Lackland, a woman in civilian clothes had appeared at my barracks. She'd shown me credentials that made my father's Chief Master Sergeant stripes look like participation ribbons. Transportation Security Administration, Special Operations Division. The badge alone carried clearance levels that could end careers or create legends. Airman Torres, she'd said, her voice carrying authority that went deeper than any uniform. Your psychological profile and security assessment scores caught our attention. We have an offer that will require you to make a difficult choice. You can complete basic training, follow the traditional Air Force path, and maybe work airport security in a few years. Or you can accept a medical discharge today and help us build the future of transportation security from the inside. The choice was brutal: visible mediocrity or invisible excellence. I chose the shadows. For the past 8 years, while my family thought I was drifting between dead-end security jobs, I'd been operating under deep cover as the youngest transportation security director in TSA history. My official title was buried in organizational charts, marked only as Regional Operations Coordinator. My real job was overseeing counterterrorism operations across 14 major airports in the Southwest, coordinating with FBI, CIA, and international intelligence agencies to prevent attacks that the public would never know were planned. The mall security job was perfect cover. Minimum wage, high turnover, no one asked questions about my background or why I occasionally disappeared for days at a time. While other guards watched for shoplifters, I monitored secure communications from terrorist cells, coordinated undercover federal air marshals, and analyzed threat patterns that could shut down American aviation. My apartment looked like any other struggling 30-something's place. Secondhand furniture, basic cable, grocery store brands filling the refrigerator. But hidden behind a false panel in my bedroom was a secure command center that connected me directly to TSA headquarters, NORAD, and 5 different intelligence agencies. The laptop that looked like a discount store special contained threat assessment software that could ground every flight in America with a single keystroke. The irony was devastating. My father spent his career securing Air Force bases with visible uniformed presence and clear protocols. I spent mine securing American aviation through invisible networks, preventing disasters that would never make headlines precisely because they'd been stopped before anyone knew they existed. Last month, while Carmen was being praised for successfully apprehending a passenger who'd made verbal threats during a routine flight, I'd spent 96 hours straight coordinating the neutralization of a sophisticated bombing plot targeting Phoenix Sky Harbor. The operation involved 12 federal agencies, cost $7 million, and prevented what intelligence estimates suggested could have been the deadliest terrorist attack since 9/11. My family would never know that their failure daughter had helped save potentially thousands of lives. The mall security guards knew me as Becca, the quiet evening shift worker who kept to herself and never caused trouble. My colleagues at TSA knew me as Director Torres, the youngest person ever to coordinate multi-agency counterterrorism operations. To my family, I was an embarrassment. To American aviation security, I was indispensable. But the cost of that secret was sitting in my father's house, watching him celebrate the daughter who'd achieved visible federal service, while mourning the daughter who'd chosen invisible protection. Every commendation Carmen earned felt like validation of my father's disappointment. Every family gathering became a reminder of the choice I'd made to let them believe I'd failed, rather than reveal the truth about what I'd actually become. My cover required complete isolation from my real life. No recognition, no explanations, no way to bridge the gap between who they thought I was and who I'd actually chosen to become. Some people protect their country in uniform, with medals and ceremonies. Others protect it in street clothes, with secrets and silence. I'd chosen the harder path, and my family's love was the price I paid for America's safety. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 2 days after the disastrous family dinner, I was halfway through my evening shift at Desert Ridge Mall when my secure phone vibrated with a priority alert. The message was brief but chilling. Credible threat, Phoenix Sky Harbor Terminal 4. Multiple suspects. Imminent timeline. Report to command center immediately. Classification: eyes only. I glanced around the food court. My supervisor, Mike, was dealing with a minor shoplifting incident near the jewelry store. The other security guards were scattered throughout the mall, focused on their routine patrols. Perfect cover for what I needed to do. I slipped into the maintenance corridor behind Macy's and activated my encrypted communication device. The secure connection established within seconds, pulling me into a crisis briefing that was unfolding in real time at one of America's busiest airports. The intelligence painted a terrifying picture. 3 suspects with confirmed terrorist connections had been tracked entering Sky Harbor's Terminal 4 over the past 6 hours. They'd arrived separately, carrying what appeared to be components for an improvised explosive device. TSA surveillance had identified suspicious behavior patterns, but the suspects had scattered throughout the terminal, making traditional interdiction impossible. The timeline was critical. Intelligence suggested the attack was planned for the evening rush, when Terminal 4 would be packed with travelers heading to the West Coast. We had less than 3 hours to identify, locate, and neutralize the threat, without causing mass panic, or shutting down one of the nation's major aviation hubs. I pulled up the tactical command interface on my secure laptop, immediately accessing real-time surveillance feeds from over 200 cameras throughout Sky Harbor. The system I was using didn't exist in any public database. It was a classified TSA network that could track individual faces through facial recognition, monitor behavioral patterns, and coordinate with federal air marshals in real time. The first suspect appeared on camera 47 near the Delta gates, moving with the calculated casualness of someone trying too hard to look normal. The second was identified by camera 23 in the food court area, checking his watch repeatedly while pretending to read a newspaper. The third had gone dark. No visual confirmation for over 30 minutes. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I coordinated with field agents I couldn't see, marshals I'd never met, and intelligence analysts whose names I'd never know. This was the kind of operation that required split-second decisions with national security implications. One wrong move could trigger the attack early. One missed detail could cost hundreds of lives. I had 42 minutes to orchestrate a takedown operation that would neutralize 3 terrorists in a crowded airport terminal without alerting them to our surveillance capabilities. The plan I developed was surgical in its precision. Using the behavioral prediction software, I identified the optimal moment when all 3 suspects would be in locations that allowed for simultaneous apprehension. Federal air marshals would coordinate with TSA agents to create a carefully choreographed operation that would look like routine security checks to other passengers. But in my focus on saving Terminal 4, I made a critical oversight. I forgot to properly secure my position at the mall. In the intensity of coordinating a counterterrorism operation, I'd left my laptop open and my communication device active when Mike knocked on the maintenance room door. "Becca, you've been back here for over an hour. Everything okay?" I quickly closed the laptop, but not before he caught a glimpse of something that didn't belong in a mall security guard's toolkit. Airport surveillance feeds, federal communication channels, and tactical coordination displays marked with classifications that carried federal prison sentences for unauthorized access. "What was that?" he asked, his expression shifting from concern to confusion. "Just personal stuff," I said, knowing how pathetic it sounded. Mike had been a Phoenix police officer for 12 years, before taking the mall security supervisor position after a back injury ended his career. He'd seen enough federal operations to recognize the real thing when he saw it. His eyes narrowed as he processed what he'd witnessed. "Becca, I need to ask you something directly. What exactly were you just doing?" I met his eyes, calculating risks and options. Mike was observant, experienced, and now suspicious. He'd also just witnessed me operating equipment that no mall security guard should have access to. "I can't explain," I said quietly. "Can't or won't?" "Can't." He stared at me for a long moment, his cop instincts clearly triggered by the discrepancy between who I appeared to be and what he'd just seen me doing. "Well," he said finally, "I guess we all have our secrets." But I could see in his eyes that he knew this was bigger than secrets, much bigger. The next morning, Mike didn't mention our encounter, but I caught him watching me differently. He'd nod when I passed the security office, but his eyes held the sharp assessment of a cop who'd stumbled onto something he couldn't quite categorize. During our shift transitions, he'd make casual comments about my technical skills, with the kind of probing tone that felt anything but casual. "You know, Becca," he said on Thursday evening as I was starting my rounds, "I've been thinking about upgrading our surveillance system. Maybe you could take a look at the specs sometime? You seem to understand complex monitoring equipment." I managed a non-committal response, but his message was clear. He was testing boundaries, trying to understand what he'd witnessed without directly challenging my cover. What I didn't know was that Mike had contacts throughout Arizona law enforcement. That same afternoon, while I was sleeping off my night shift, Mike made a phone call to his former partner at Phoenix PD. Detective Lisa Chen had transitioned to a joint terrorism task force after 9/11, working closely with federal agencies on security investigations. "Lisa, it's Mike Morrison. I need to run something by you off the record," he began, settling into his office chair at the mall. "If someone was operating federal surveillance equipment without authorization, what would that look like from your end?" Detective Chen had spent 6 years investigating security breaches and potential domestic threats. "That's oddly specific, Mike. What's going on?" Mike described what he'd seen: the airport surveillance feeds, the federal communication channels, the tactical coordination displays. He was careful not to name me directly, but painted a clear picture of someone with access to systems that belonged exclusively to federal agencies. "Jesus, Mike," Chen said after a long pause, "that's not just unauthorized access, that sounds like TSA or DHS level systems. Either someone's conducting espionage against federal aviation security, or what? Or they're supposed to have that access and they're working under extremely deep cover." Meanwhile, at the Federal Air Marshal Service Regional Office in Phoenix, Carmen was experiencing her own moment of confusion. She'd been assigned to review operational summaries from recent security incidents, including the Sky Harbor threat that had been neutralized earlier in the week. The Terminal 4 operation had been classified at her clearance level, but Carmen's position gave her access to the after-action reports. What puzzled her wasn't the incident itself. Terrorist threats weren't uncommon, but the coordination methodology described in the operational summary. The threat assessment showed a level of real-time intelligence integration that impressed even seasoned federal air marshals. Whoever had coordinated the response had used a technique called behavioral prediction modeling, a sophisticated approach that most TSA officers knew about theoretically, but few could execute under pressure. Marshal Torres, her supervisor, Deputy Director James Walsh, called her into his office. "You've been reviewing the Sky Harbor incident reports. Notice anything interesting about the operational approach?" Carmen looked up from her tablet. "The coordination was exceptional, sir. Whoever managed the response prevented a potential catastrophe using predictive analysis that most of our people study but rarely implement in real-time situations." Deputy Director Walsh nodded slowly. "The technique used behavioral prediction modeling with real-time facial recognition integration. It's not widely implemented. In fact, there are maybe 8 people in the Southwest region with the clearance level and practical experience to execute something like that under pressure." He pulled up a classified personnel roster on his screen. "We've been trying to identify who coordinated the response. The operation required someone with access to multiple federal surveillance networks, advanced behavioral analysis training, and real-time decision-making authority at the director level." Carmen studied the list of names and clearance classifications. These are all senior TSA directors and intelligence liaisons. Most of them have been doing this for decades. "Exactly. Which makes the operational profile interesting." Walsh highlighted several entries. "The person who coordinated this response demonstrated institutional knowledge that typically requires 10 to 15 years to develop, but the tactical flexibility suggests someone younger, more adaptable to rapidly changing circumstances." He paused, studying Carmen's expression. "Marshal Torres, I want you to run a background investigation for me." I need you to look into anyone with prior military training who might have transitioned into classified TSA operations. Someone who left traditional career paths but remained in the federal security system. Carmen felt an odd chill. Any particular demographic focus, sir? Focus on military personnel from about 8 years ago, people who might have been recruited into programs that don't appear on standard federal employment records. That evening, as Carmen began her research, she kept thinking about the conversation she'd had with her father about Rebecca. About her mysterious medical discharge. About her 8 years of drifting between low-level security jobs. About how someone with her psychological profile and aptitude scores might have skills that a family dinner couldn't reveal. 300 miles away, Mike was having coffee with Detective Chen, who'd driven down specifically for this conversation. I ran some discreet inquiries, Chen said, keeping her voice low. The good news is your employee isn't on any watch lists for unauthorized system access. The concerning news is that the equipment she was using, it's only issued to personnel with TS/SCI clearance. Mike nearly choked on his coffee. TS/SCI? Top secret, sensitive compartmented information. The kind of clearance that requires polygraph examinations and background investigations going back to elementary school. Chen leaned forward. Mike, either your mall guard is the most dangerous security breach in Arizona, or she's exactly who she's supposed to be. Carmen stared at her computer screen in disbelief, reading the classified personnel entry for the 4th time that morning. According to the federal database, there was indeed a Rebecca Torres listed in the Transportation Security Administration's Special Operations Division. The file was heavily redacted, but the essential information was unmistakable. She'd been recruited directly from Air Force basic training 8 years ago, and held one of the highest security clearances in the federal transportation security system. The same Rebecca Torres who lived in a studio apartment and worked mall security for minimum wage. Her sister. The revelation hit her like physical trauma. She thought about every family gathering, every disappointed comment from their father, every moment she'd felt guilty for receiving praise while Rebecca struggled. All of it built on a fundamental misunderstanding, not Rebecca's deception, but their collective failure to recognize what classified service actually required. Carmen's hands shook as she reached for her secure phone. She needed verification of what she was seeing, but protocol demanded she work through established channels. She called Deputy Director Walsh. Sir, I need to request a priority meeting about the Sky Harbor investigation. There's been a significant development. An hour later, Carmen sat across from Walsh in his secured conference room, struggling to find words for what she'd discovered. Sir, I believe I know who coordinated the Terminal 4 response. Walsh leaned forward intently. Proceed, Marshal. It's my sister, sir. Rebecca Torres. She's listed as a Transportation Security Director in the TSA Special Operations Division. The silence that followed felt eternal. Walsh's expression shifted from surprise to concern, to something that looked like professional recognition. Marshal Torres, I need you to understand something about classified operations. If your sister is who you think she is, then her cover identity is absolutely critical to ongoing national security operations. This conversation is now classified at the highest levels. Carmen nodded, but her mind was reeling. Sir, my family thinks she's a complete failure. My father called her a disappointment just this week. We've been treating her like she's some kind of burden for 8 years. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own security crisis. My encrypted communication device had been buzzing all morning with increasingly urgent messages about a potential cover compromise. Someone had been running background checks that triggered automatic alerts within the intelligence community. I knew the investigation had to be connected to my operational security failure at the mall, but I didn't realize how close it was getting to my family until Carmen called me that afternoon. Rebecca, we need to talk. Can you meet me somewhere private? There was something in her voice, not the casual sisterly concern I was used to, but the careful professionalism of someone handling classified information. My stomach dropped. What's this about, Carmen? Just meet me at Papago Park, the hiking trail near the Buttes, and Rebecca, come alone. I arrived first, choosing a location that provided clear sightlines and minimal surveillance risk. When Carmen appeared, she was in civilian clothes but walking with the purposeful stride of someone on official federal business. She carried a manila envelope that she placed on the picnic table between us without opening it. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I kept my expression neutral, but adrenaline was flooding my system. "Okay. Are you who I think you are?" The question hung between us like a live wire. I could deflect, maintain operational security, protect my cover like I'd been trained, or I could trust the sister who'd always defended me, even when she didn't understand what she was defending. "Carmen, there are things I can't." "Rebecca." She opened the envelope and showed me a printed page with my TSA personnel record, heavily redacted but unmistakably authentic. "I know what this means. I know what you are." My carefully constructed separation between identities was collapsing, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "How did you—" "The Sky Harbor operation. The Terminal 4 threat neutralization. The coordination methodology was brilliant, but it was also distinctive. We've been trying to identify who managed the response." I stared at the document, seeing my classified identity reflected in my sister's eyes. 8 years of meticulous cover maintenance, destroyed by a moment of operational excellence. "Carmen, if you know what this is, then you know why I couldn't tell you." "I know why you couldn't tell me," she said quietly. "But Rebecca, Dad thinks you're a complete disappointment. He's been carrying shame about you for years, believing he somehow failed as a father." The weight of that knowledge crushed me. I'd thought I was protecting my family by accepting their disappointment. Instead, I'd been destroying my father's faith in his own parenting. Carmen and I agreed to meet again the following day to discuss how to handle the family situation. But what we didn't know was that events were already accelerating beyond our control. Deputy Director Walsh had been in direct communication with TSA headquarters since Carmen's revelation. The security investigation triggered by Mike's inquiries had already flagged my cover as potentially compromised. Now, with Carmen's discovery, the federal agencies faced a delicate dilemma: how to extract me from a blown operation without confirming the existence of programs that officially didn't exist. The solution they devised was both elegant and devastating. "We're going to orchestrate a controlled exposure scenario," my handler, Director Maria Santos, explained during an emergency secure briefing at a safe house near Sky Harbor. "Your sister has a commendation ceremony scheduled for tomorrow at Phoenix Sky Harbor. It's the perfect opportunity to resolve this situation cleanly." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Ma'am, my entire family will be there. My father, my stepmother." "Which is precisely why it will work effectively. We need a public forum where your identity can be revealed in a way that appears accidental but is actually completely controlled." Director Santos pulled up a detailed operational plan on her secure tablet. "Marshal Torres has been instructed to invite Deputy Director Walsh to the ceremony as her supervising officer. He'll be there in an official federal capacity." "You're going to blow my cover in front of my family?" "We're going to transition your cover by redefining it. The mall security operation was always intended to be temporary. We have a new assignment for you, one that allows you to operate more openly while maintaining necessary security protocols." The plan was more intricate than I'd initially understood. Carmen had been read into a limited version of my operational history, but only enough to understand why the revelation needed to happen in a controlled environment. She'd been instructed to ensure that our father attended the ceremony and to arrange seating for our family in a specific section of the airport's ceremonial hall. Meanwhile, Mike had been contacted by TSA security personnel. The conversation was brief and left him with more questions than answers, but one thing was crystal clear. Whatever he'd witnessed, he needed to permanently forget it had ever happened. His law enforcement background meant he understood the implications without requiring detailed explanations. "Rebecca's a solid employee," Mike told the security officer. "Whatever she's involved in, I hope she stays safe and gets the recognition she deserves." The trap was set for Friday afternoon at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. Carmen's ceremony for her recent commendation would be a small event, attended by federal air marshals and family members. Deputy Director Walsh would preside, and several other senior TSA officials would be present. According to the operational plan, everything would proceed normally until the moment Walsh publicly acknowledged my presence in the audience. The TSA had prepared a cover story. I was being recognized for civilian contributions to transportation security operations. It was deliberately vague enough to avoid revealing classified details while providing justification for my public recognition. My father would finally learn that his daughter hadn't failed. She'd succeeded beyond anything his military experience could have prepared him to understand. But I wasn't emotionally prepared for the complexity of what was about to happen. Thursday night, I sat in my sparse apartment, staring at the carefully crafted biography that would replace my mall security worker identity. After 8 years of invisibility, I was about to become visible again. After nearly a decade of letting my family believe I was worthless, I was about to prove them wrong in the most public way possible. The phone rang at 10:30 p.m. Carmen's voice was tight with anxiety. "Rebecca, I need to warn you about something. Dad's been talking about tomorrow's ceremony all week. He's proud of me, but he keeps mentioning how he wishes you could find direction like I have. Tomorrow is going to completely destroy everything he thinks he knows about you." I know. Are you prepared for that kind of revelation? I looked around my minimal apartment, at the carefully constructed life I'd built on secrecy and sacrifice. Tomorrow I would have to watch my father's face as he realized that everything he believed about his eldest daughter was fundamentally wrong. That every moment of disappointment he'd expressed, every instance of shame he'd felt about my choices, had been based on a lie I'd been professionally required to maintain. "No," I said honestly, "I don't think anyone could be prepared for something like this. Rebecca, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of who you really are." Friday morning arrived bright and clear, typical Arizona weather that seemed to mock my emotional turbulence. I dressed carefully. Not in the mall security uniform my family expected, but in professional attire appropriate for someone about to be publicly recognized for classified federal service. The ceremony would change everything forever. The Phoenix Sky Harbor Ceremonial Hall was smaller than I had expected, but every seat was occupied by federal air marshals, TSA personnel, and family members. I sat in the back corner exactly where Carmen had instructed, wearing a charcoal blazer that felt foreign after years of mall security uniforms. My father sat 4 rows ahead with Linda, his posture rigid with military pride, as he prepared to watch his younger daughter receive recognition for her federal service. Deputy Director Walsh stood at the podium, his voice carrying clearly through the room as he began the ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to honor excellence in aviation security and the dedication required to protect American transportation systems from those who would do us harm." Carmen looked confident as she stood at attention in her crisp Federal Air Marshal uniform, but I caught the slight tension in her shoulders. She knew what was coming, even if the exact timing remained uncertain. The commendation ceremony proceeded normally. Carmen stepped forward as Walsh read the citation for her recent performance, highlighting her professionalism during a critical passenger incident and her potential for greater leadership responsibilities. My father's chest visibly swelled with pride, and I felt the familiar ache of watching my family celebrate achievements I could never claim. Walsh presented Carmen with her commendation, and the audience applauded respectfully. For a moment, I thought perhaps the TSA had reconsidered their plan, that I would leave this ceremony with my cover intact, and my family still believing their version of Rebecca Torres. Then Walsh's voice cut through the applause with unexpected authority. "Before we conclude today's proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge some additional personnel who have contributed significantly to our transportation security mission." The room settled into attentive silence, my pulse hammered against my throat. Aviation security requires coordination between multiple federal agencies and personnel operating at every classification level. Sometimes our most critical contributors work in positions that require them to serve without public recognition. Walsh's eyes found mine across the room with surgical precision. "Today, I want to publicly acknowledge one such contributor." My father shifted in his seat, probably wondering why the ceremony was continuing beyond Carmen's recognition. "Would Rebecca Torres please stand?" The sound of my name in that official context sent electricity through the room. My father's head snapped around, confusion written across his weathered face as he located me in the back corner. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me, aware that every eye in the hall was now focused on me. Walsh continued, his voice gaining institutional authority. Rebecca Torres has served with distinction as a Transportation Security Director with the TSA Special Operations Division for the past 8 years. Her work coordinating classified counterterrorism operations has been instrumental in preventing attacks against American aviation and protecting civilian lives. The silence was deafening. I watched my father's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition dawning. Linda's mouth fell open. Carmen stood at attention, but I could see relief in her expression that the secret was finally being revealed. Director Torres's recent coordination during a critical threat situation at this very airport potentially prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack. Her expertise in behavioral prediction analysis and real-time intelligence coordination represents the highest standards of transportation security excellence. Walsh's voice carried to every corner of the ceremonial hall. "Director Torres, please come forward." The walk down that aisle felt infinite. Every step took me further from the daughter my father thought he'd raised and closer to the federal agent I'd actually become. The uniforms blurred past me, but I kept my eyes focused on Walsh, using his steady presence as an anchor against the surreal nature of what was happening. When I reached the front, Walsh extended his hand with genuine respect. "On behalf of the Transportation Security Administration and our partners in the federal law enforcement community, thank you for your exceptional service." The handshake was firm, professional, but I could see approval and something like admiration in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Walsh announced to the room, Transportation Security Director Rebecca Torres. The applause that followed was thunderous, but it felt distant and dreamlike. I turned to face the audience and immediately found my father's eyes. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not pride, not disappointment, but complete shock, as if he was seeing me for the very first time in his life. My 8-year cover was officially terminated. My real identity had just been born. The reception following the ceremony was controlled chaos disguised as professional networking. Federal Air Marshals approached me with congratulations and questions I couldn't fully answer due to classification levels, while my family stood paralyzed in a bubble of shock 15 feet away. I caught glimpses of my father through the crowd, his face cycling between bewilderment, anger, and something that looked like profound grief. Carmen materialized beside me, still wearing her commendation pin. "How are you handling this?" "I feel like I'm watching someone else's life unfold in real time," I replied, accepting another handshake from a TSA supervisor I'd coordinated with but had never met face to face. "Dad hasn't moved from that spot in 30 minutes, Carmen observed quietly. "I think he's trying to process the fact that everything he believed about his eldest daughter was completely wrong." Deputy Director Walsh approached us, his expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal concern. "Director Torres, you'll need to report for operational transition briefing Monday morning at 0800 hours. Your cover change will require extensive documentation and protocol adjustments." "What does this mean for my family situation, sir?" "They'll receive limited briefings on operational necessities, enough to understand why secrecy was required, not enough to compromise ongoing classified operations. Your father will need to sign federal non-disclosure agreements, but he'll finally have context for your career choices." Through the crowd, I saw Linda trying to guide my father toward the exit, but he kept stopping to stare back at me with the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been shattered. The weight of 8 years of misunderstanding seemed to have physically aged him during the past hour. This wasn't the triumphant revelation I'd sometimes imagined during lonely nights at the mall. This was a man confronting the devastating reality that he'd spent nearly a decade mourning a daughter who had never actually failed. The drive to my father's house was conducted in absolute silence. Carmen had offered to facilitate the conversation, to help bridge the gap between the daughter he'd known and the federal agent he'd just discovered. But I knew this conversation had to happen directly between us, without intermediaries or explanations filtered through military or federal protocols. I waited 2 hours before driving to the house where I'd grown up. Linda answered the door, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Rebecca, I don't know what to say to you, she whispered. All these years, we thought you were… I know exactly what you thought. It's what I needed you to think for operational security reasons. Your father is in his study. He's been sitting there since we returned from the airport, just staring at your basic training graduation photo, the one from before you received your medical discharge. I found him exactly as Linda had described, holding the framed photograph from my Air Force days. The young woman in the picture looked confident, purposeful, unaware of the weight of secrets she didn't yet know she'd be required to carry for her country. Dad? He looked up, and I saw that he'd been crying. Chief Master Sergeant Robert Torres, 26 years of Air Force Command authority, tears streaming down his weathered face. I called you a failure, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I told people my eldest daughter was a disappointment who couldn't handle military pressure. I sat across from him, the distance feeling vast despite the familiar small room. You said what you needed to say based on the information you had available. But Rebecca, I should have known better, I should have recognized. He set the photograph down with trembling hands. A transportation security director, 8 years of classified federal service. And I've been carrying guilt and shame, thinking I somehow failed you as a father. You didn't fail me, Dad. I failed to understand that when someone disappears from traditional career paths, it doesn't mean they've disappeared from purpose or duty. He looked directly at me for the first time since the ceremony. How many American lives have you saved that I'll never be allowed to know about? Dad, I can't provide specific. I'm not asking for operational details. I'm asking you to help me understand how to be proud of a daughter whose achievements I'm not cleared to know. The question hung between us, heavy with 8 years of missed connections and fundamentally misunderstood sacrifices. 3 weeks later, my father called and asked me to lunch. Not a family gathering, not a celebration. Just the two of us, trying to rebuild 8 years of misunderstanding with honest conversation and careful trust. I arrived at the small Mexican restaurant he'd chosen, a quiet place in central Phoenix where we could talk without being overheard. He was already seated, studying the menu with the same intense focus he used to bring to military briefings. I've been reading about the Transportation Security Administration, he said without preamble as I sat down. Public information, declassified reports. Trying to understand what you've been part of without asking for details I'm not cleared to hear. And what did you learn? That most of their most important work never makes headlines because success is measured by disasters that never happen, he looked up from the menu. Carmen told me about the Sky Harbor incident, how you prevented what could have been another 9/11. I nodded carefully, staying within the bounds of what Carmen had been authorized to share. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. When you received that medical discharge, I thought I'd failed as a father. I thought I'd raised a daughter who couldn't handle pressure, who walked away when service got difficult. I know. For 8 years I've been carrying that guilt, wondering what I could have done differently, what warning signs I should have seen. His voice was steady, but I could hear the emotion underneath. I've been mourning the daughter I thought I lost, while being disappointed in the daughter I thought remained. You couldn't have known the truth, but I should have trusted you. I should have believed that the daughter I raised, the one who excelled at everything, who had more integrity than recruits twice her age, wouldn't just give up. He leaned forward across the small table. I should have known that if Rebecca Torres disappeared from view, it was because she'd found something more important than visibility. The waiter approached, but my father waved him away. This conversation couldn't be interrupted by mundane concerns. I'm proud of you, he said simply. Not just for what you've accomplished in federal service, but for the sacrifice you made to accomplish it. You let your family think less of you, so you could serve something greater than family approval. It was harder than I expected, I admitted. Watching you celebrate Carmen while thinking I was a disappointment. Knowing I could never explain why I'd made the choices I made. Linda wants to tell everyone we know, invite the whole neighborhood, announce that our daughter is actually some kind of Homeland Security hero. He smiled slightly. I told her that would completely miss the point. What is the point? The point is that you chose duty over recognition. You chose service over family understanding. You chose to let people think less of you, rather than compromise national security. He reached across the table and took my hand. That's not failure, Rebecca. That's the highest form of honor I can conceive of. For the first time in 8 years, I felt like my father truly saw me. Carmen suggested we update the family photos, he said. Add some recent pictures, fill in the missing years. I'd like that very much. But Rebecca, I need you to know, even if I never learn the details of your work, even if most of your service remains invisible to me, I will never again doubt that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The reconciliation wasn't complete. 8 years of misunderstanding couldn't be erased over lunch. But it was a beginning. 6 months later, I was assigned to TSA headquarters as Deputy Director of Threat Assessment. For the first time in 8 years, my family could tell people what I actually did for a living. My father calls every Sunday now. Our conversations are careful but filled with genuine understanding. He's learned to ask questions I can answer, and I've learned to share victories that aren't buried in secrecy. Last month, Carmen and I spoke together at a law enforcement conference. Watching my father beam with equal pride for both daughters felt like healing I hadn't known I needed. I've been thinking about legacy, he said over dinner afterward. You taught me that the most important service often happens in shadows, that honor doesn't always come with recognition. Dad, every night for 8 years, when I prevented an attack, I thought about families who would never know their flight was saved. But I also thought about whether you'd be proud of choices you could never know I was making. He took my hand. I was always proud of you, Rebecca. I just didn't understand what I was proud of. My name won't appear in history books. My achievements will remain classified. But I sleep peacefully knowing families board airplanes safely because people like me choose to work in shadows. Recognition was never the point. The point was the work itself, the lives protected, the disasters prevented. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people whose names you'll never know, for reasons forever classified. And that's exactly how it should be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.